Can a $500 guitar be just as good as a $2,500 guitar? Hey everybody, Jace Allen here. Welcome back to the channel. So a little while ago I did a review on a Heritage H150 Les Paul style guitar from the Heritage Guitar Company in Kalamazoo, Michigan, home of the Gibson Guitar Company before 1984. That guitar retails for about $25.99. So what I've been doing since then is trying to find a budget guitar with very similar specs. Because after reviewing the Heritage guitar, I realized a few things about the budget Les Pauls that kind of set the two guitars apart and sort of made the cost difference a little more understandable. The Heritage H150 has a solid mahogany body. It's a genuine mahogany body, so that means it's a little more expensive than if it were, say, African mahogany, but it's a single piece. There's no seams in it. And then the neck is also made from one single piece of genuine mahogany. Fretboard is rosewood, and it features around a 5/8 inch thick flame maple cap, and that's where they get the carved top from. And then aside from that, the electronics are pretty high end. They have CTS pots and Switchcraft hardware, and it features Seymour Duncan pickups. And of course, it's made in the USA with US labor. Comes from a shop over there in Kalamazoo that occupies the former Gibson guitar factory, and they employ about 50 people, and much of the work done on the guitars down there is done by hand. Yes, they do have a CNC machine that they do a lot of the preliminary carving and cutouts for the different components, but a lot of the finish work is done by hand. Painting is done by hand. Clear coating is done by hand. They use nitrocellulose paint and clear coat. The buffing is done by hand. Things like the frets are set by hand, the bindings, things like that. Finish sanding and carving on the necks is done by hand. So there's a lot of handwork that goes into those guitars. So then if you compare that particular guitar to, say, one of the Firefly brand, which I have also, and you begin to see some differences that might be subtle at first, but it's definitely the reason why one guitar is so much more expensive than the other. The Firefly Les Paul style guitar, that would be the FFSP model. I have a Relict model. And they feature a multi-piece mahogany body, and they're covered with a mahogany laminate on the sides and the back to make it look like it's one solid piece of mahogany. And then the top is actually carved out of that piece of mahogany, or those pieces of mahogany rather, and then there's a very thin veneer, probably 30/2 of an inch, just a real thin veneer of maple, flame maple, that goes on top of that, and it's kind of vacuum formed on or pressed down onto the top. And then that's how you get your sort of your flame maple. But you could sand through that eventually. It's just a real thin veneer. And then the neck is a multi-piece neck. They use a scarf joint, and then the heel, I think, has a seam in it. And then the fretboard on that is also rosewood, and they have some pretty good pickups on that on the Firefly guitar. They're Alnico pickups. They're unbranded. I don't know where they come from. Probably just a generic pickup made in China. And the pots are full-size pots, but they're not CTS. And the components and the hardware, like the switches and the knobs and things like that, are just generic, non-branded components. So when you compare those two guitars side by side, and we're not talking necessarily about the sound of the guitar, because they sound pretty similar to each other. I think the Heritage guitar actually sounds better than the Firefly when I did sort of that side by side comparison. But I'm talking about features and components and how they're made. So it's easy to see why one costs so much more than the other. Obviously the Firefly guitar is made in China, and they're probably 99% of it is made on the CNC machine. Obviously things like binding and setting the frets and wiring the components and doing all that stuff, human hands have to be involved in that process. But you're also dealing with inexpensive, aka cheap, Chinese labor over there, and so it brings the cost of those guitars down to right around $225 retail, but a lot of times Firefly has them on sale for less than $200. So I sort of challenged myself to see if I could find a Les Paul style guitar with specs that were very close to the Heritage guitar, but the guitar, I was going to try to see how cheap I could find a guitar that had very, very similar specs. And I think I did it with this guitar right here. Okay, so this is a guitar that I got off of Reverb, and here it is. Right there, look at that. This is Agile. This is the model AL3000, made by Agile and distributed, sold in the US by a company called Rondo Music. And unfortunately, this particular model has been discontinued, but you can find them on Reverb and eBay. And this guitar was $500 on Reverb, and they retailed for, I think, $395 when they were new back in the early 2000s. And wait till you hear the specs on this particular guitar. Okay, so it's obviously a Les Paul style guitar. It has quite a nice flame maple top on it, and it's supposedly, according to the specs, it is a full thickness, right around a 5/8 inch thick Canadian flame maple top. And if you take a look at the back of this thing, you can see that it is a single piece of mahogany, just like the Heritage. And then if you look on the back, it is almost a solid piece. There appears to be a seam in the heel, but it's really hard to tell. I can't tell if that's just a grain line or what, but it looks like this sort of heel part was put on later. So I'm not sure, but it doesn't have the scarf joint in it like the Firefly guitars, so it was made from, a solid piece of wood. Nickel frets, just like the Heritage. So it features a mother of pearl inlay on the headstock for the logo. These are actual abalone inlays on the fretboard. It comes with, says triple binding on the specs there, but it's actually 7 layers of binding. It's got the real thin pieces of black in between the cream binding. The binding around the neck is a single ply, and then it follows that same multi-ply binding around the headstock. And then you have Grover tuners. You would probably expect a guitar like this to have been made in China, but this one is not. These are made in Korea. And it has Alnico pickups, 2-volume, 2-tone, pretty much the same as any Les Paul style guitar. 3-way switch. It says it's a Graphtec nut, so that's going to be the Tusk nut. This would be a 1 5/8 inch nut. It's a 24.7 inch scale length, and it weighs a whopping 10 pounds. So this is a pretty heavy guitar. Nickel-plated cast hardware, just your standard 2-pneumatic style bridge. And it's got a 13.7 inch, so that'd be a 350 millimeter neck radius. And of course a double truss rod adjustment. One feature that this guitar has that the Heritage doesn't and it's pretty surprising, and that is an ebony fretboard. So that is pretty interesting for a guitar in this price range. So how does it sound compared to the Heritage? Well, let's check it out. Okay, so that's a couple sound examples there between the two guitars. As far as tone goes, there's really not a lot of difference. Playability, while I was playing those little sound examples, the action on this one's just a little bit higher, but that can obviously be fixed. This is the Heritage, by the way. And they're very, very, very similar guitars. So yeah, so if you're looking for a Les Paul style guitar that's affordable but is built to the spec of a more expensive Les Paul guitar, then I would go online and search for this. This is the Agile AL3000. Now there's a bunch of different models that are still in production, by the way, but they're built more like the other import style Les Paul style guitars with, you know, maybe 2 or 3 piece bodies, the neck with the scarf joint in it. And so the build quality, no, I'm not necessarily saying that that's better or worse. It's just that they're a more economical form of building. But I kind of dig the, you know, solid pieces of wood and definitely digging the ebony fretboard. So I don't think you can go wrong with a guitar like this. Like I said, I got this for $500. You can probably, maybe if you keep an eye out, you might be able to find one for less than that. But this is an excellent, excellent guitar. Definitely punches above its weight class, I think. And it is really, really comparable to that Heritage Les Paul style guitar. So there you go, another guitar review from J. Salen Guitar. Thanks everybody for tuning in. And I started a Patreon page, so if you're interested in signing up for that, there's a free tier and then there's a low cost monthly tier. The monthly tier will have some exclusive content in it that's not going to be available to the free tier or to the YouTube channel. I'm going to try to involve people more in the decision-making process for videos and video content and what guitars to buy. And then when we do guitar builds, we'll get a lot of input from the members that way, and we'll do shout outs to the members as well. So thanks again for tuning in. Jason, we'll see you next time.